This tutorial series is brought to you by Polygon. Make better renders faster. G'day and welcome to another edition of Donuts Will Haunt Your Dreams Soon because they're haunting mine. Seriously, I've been thinking about nothing else for 3 weeks other than donuts. I'm actually dreaming of donuts. No, that's not a joke. Anyways, we have, in the last video, we painted our donut and it looks more donutty, but not enough. It still looks like something you'd see out of an early Pixar movie because there's no detail to the surface of our donut. If you compare it to reference photos of donuts, you can see you got all this like glistening bits that are sticking out and like bumps and little crevices and dark patches and all that good stuff. And that is the perfect thing, not for painting, but for procedural texturing. So with your donut selected, we're going to go into the shading mode, which is this mode right here. And by the way, just in case it's not, it should be look dev mode when you are in shading mode. And by the way, this, I didn't really explain what look dev mode is, but solid view mode is the same mode that you see when you're in like layout mode, like this view. And then look dev mode is actually using the Eevee renderer to preview your material that you've got active with an HDR. So it's using the HDR that's available here, which is basically like a template light and reflections for it. So look dev stands for look development. So it's the perfect shader for, previewing material so that you can work fast without having to set up lights and everything. It's just like, it's there and it's awesome. So when you go into shading mode, it should already be there in look dev mode, but just telling you in case it's not. Anyways, okay, so to put that at the top there, and then here we have our node setup. Okay, so right now all we've got is just that image texture that we painted, and that's going straight into our base color there. So what we want to do is we want to add in a procedural texture. Procedural means it's by computer generated. So to do that, we're going to go Shift A, and then where it's got texture, you can see we've got a whole range of different textures here. Image texture was the one that we used before. That's obvious. And then the one we're looking for is noise texture. So we add that, and that'll drop this guy in here. And if we want to look at what this is going to look like on our mesh, the best way to do that is to actually use an add-on that comes with Blender. So if you go to Edit, Preferences, and then underneath the add-on section, search for Node Wrangler, and then just check the box next to it, and that will enable it. And then once you've done that, you can Control-Shift left-click on that node, and it will preview it over your model. Right? Let me just hide that stuff. There we go. And there you go. So you can see that's what the texture is doing. So that's the default like color input, but if you Control-Shift click on it again, it'll view the next input down, which is the FAC or factor, and that's black and white. So what we want to do is we want to use this black and white cloud texture to drive the bumpiness of our material as well as the color and contribute to it in that way. And it's a very common way of just adding like free detail to objects. But before we do that, one thing to note looking at the donut here with this texture, the texture is kind of stretched. Like there's more detail across this surface, but less this way. And that's just because the way that this is mapped onto it right now. It's not using UVs or anything like that. But the best way to change that is by adding in a Shift A, vector mapping, no, hang on. Texture coordinate, that's the one, texture coordinate node. And if we just take the object output and drop that into the vector input, this is now going to use the object data, which is actually most appropriate for like procedural textures. Anyways, now that I've done that, if we increase the scale of this, we should see pretty standard detail everywhere without there being like more or less detail in different places. So that's good. Okay, so looking at this cloudy texture here, I mean, let's just set this to, I don't know, 300. That looks fine. And let's start by making this affect the bump of our material. So to use bump mapping in Blender, there's two ways of basically contributing to bump. There's bump, which is kind of like fake bump, and then there's bump, which is real bump, and that's actually changing the shape of the actual mesh. And that's the one we want to use for this. So that's called displacements. So I'm going to take this output of this, and I am going to add in Shift A, a vector, underneath vector displacement. So drop this in here. And then what I want to do is I want to take the factor output of that and put that into the top of the height. And then I want to take that displacement and put that into the bottom of our material output right there. Okay, now by default, it's still looking at this noise texture here, but if we Control-Shift-Click on our just main shader, the principal shader, we should now see the effect of that on our mesh. Now, currently we can't because we're actually in look dev mode and it's kind of like not showing us the detail very well, but in rendered view mode, you can see with actual light that has like shadows and everything, you can see the effect that it's having. And again, this clipping thing, it's gonna drive me crazy. And my screen keys tool's turned off. Not that it really matters for this part, but anyways. Okay, so that's the kind of bump that it's got over our mesh. And that looks pretty good. It's not bad, but you'll see that it's not changing the, like if you look at the edges of the object aren't changed. So when you're doing it just like this is actually the fake bump way. It would be the same as if you put it into the normal input for those who know what that is. But by default, this is what it's doing. So it's the fake bump. But if we want to make it so that it actually is displacing the shape of our mesh, we want to change right down here, underneath your settings, you want to change the displacement from bump only to displacement and bump. And before I do that, let me just Control-Shift and save because I am using a experimental build. Okay, there we go. So when you do that, what it's going to do now is it's actually displacing the donut. And hey, anybody order a porcupine? The reason is it's the scale of it. This is the height of the bump, that value there, way too high. So we're going to set this to 0.01. And let's see how that looks. There we go. So you can see now, looking at the edge of it, at the edge of the donut, it's actually physically displacing it. You can see that looks a lot more realistic than before. This is with bump only. And then this is with displacement and bump. Now I think scale of 0.01 is still too high. Let's go 0.02 perhaps, or 0.03 perhaps, something like that. That's okay. And by the way, this is using the mesh to displace it. So it will depend, the look of your displacement will depend on the number of vertices that you've got here, the amount of detail. If you don't have enough detail and you want to add more, you can just go to the modifier stack and add in a new subsurf modifier like this. And then you would see like smoother, like less spikes. If you see like lots of spikes, it's generally a sign you've got like not enough vertices for it to play with. So you might want to add a subsurf modifier in there. But anyways, that's not bad. Now, what I actually want is for like really, really small detail. So I'm going to crank this scale up to 1,000. No, let's go 115. No, not 15,000. 1,500. There we go. Something like that. Great. So this was a good little primer to show you what procedural textures can do. But in the next video, because I want to keep these, relatively short, we're going to add in another procedural texture. We're going to combine it and we're going to make it contribute to the color map as well. And then just basically finish off the donut and finish off level 2. So click here to watch the next part and I will see you there.